Hello and welcome to Esther's Gardening Adventures. I'm Esther, and today I thought I would tie up some loose ends of some projects and experiments I tried this year with both in my garden and winter sowing. And if this is your first time hearing about the term winter sowing, or you want to know more about it, please check out my Winter Sowing 101 series where I break down everything you need to know. But in a nutshell, for those who aren't familiar with it, it's basically a way of growing your seedlings for the spring and summer garden, but growing them outdoors in milk jugs instead of indoors under grow lights. And by the way, I'll be sure to link to all of these videos where I started the experiment, so you can go back and look at them if you're curious to see how it started and see more details, because I'm not going to go into every component of it this time. So the first experiment that I want to talk about is my trying to figure out which soil works best for winter sowing containers. When you're winter sowing, you basically cut open your milk jugs, you cut them in half, and you put a 4-inch layer of potting mix on the bottom. And one big question in my mind and in the mind of a lot of people over time is what works best in those containers? What will yield the best results for seedlings? One thing we do know is you don't use a seed starting mix or plain coconut coir or things that don't have nutrients in them, because you need something to feed the seedlings once they start to get bigger. Historically, I have used Happy Frog and Ocean Forest, which are two pretty premium. I also use Espoma, but they're pretty premium organic potting mixes. And they run anywhere from $20 to $30 per cubic foot to cubic foot and a half. And that's good for jugs, but it's quite expensive. And if you're on a budget, it's not, it's not that affordable. And so I also sometimes try using the organic version. I think it's called Nature's Best. And I'll put the name up here for it. And this year I tried growing peppers, both using the Happy Frog and this organic lower cost. I mean, it's like $10 for the same amount as like $20 to $30 for the Happy Frog. Truth be told, I think the jury is still out on it. I just found this last year's Happy Frog mix didn't work quite as well as the year before. It still worked really well, but I think it worked just about the same as the organic lower cost, I don't want to say quality, lower cost mix. And there were a couple of mitigating factors in this. I was watching the seedlings as they were growing, and they were both growing at about the same rate. The sprout rate was about the same. But then I also had a problem with slugs this year for my peppers, especially with them eating the leaves. And so it made it harder to compare the two. So I would say there probably is a slight difference in the longer term of how healthy your plants are going. But if you need to cut corners, and as long as you go with organic, because that's just better for your plants overall, getting that lower end potting mix won't be the end of the world. So I tried winter sowing. I tried growing sprouting seeds from 16-year-old tomato seeds that my mom had. They were beefsteak tomatoes, and they did not end up sprouting. Now, to be fair, tomatoes usually the seeds can last 15 to 16 years, but this packet had been greatly abused. It had not been kept in a cold, dry place. The packet itself was all bent up. I had kept it laying around like in my backpack. I mean, so those seeds didn't have great chances to begin with. And I don't think that should discourage you. The fact they didn't sprout should discourage you from trying, because it's just fun. Some people have been able to grow seeds that are extremely ancient, that have been stored in the right conditions, or they're just lucky. And so it's still fun to see if those kinds of things will grow. Another seed that I tried growing were elderberries. And I followed the packet's instructions. And usually, I've had great success growing difficult to grow plants using the winter sowing process, like native perennials, like yarrow and lavender, which isn't native, but it's a perennial, and all kinds of plants. I've had really good success, but there have been a few I haven't. And elderberries I've tried to sprout 2 years in a row, once using the winter sowing process, and I did not have success. Now, the packet was a couple of years old. I may not have done the process right, but I didn't end up growing elderberry seedlings this year using that process. I am giving an update on my single seed challenge plant. So the single seed challenge for 2021, and there was one prior year, but the one I participated in this year, basically you track the progress of one single seed that you plant from planting it to sprouting to the end of its life cycle. And the plant that I grew was a Nagasaki long Japanese eggplant. Beautiful, dark purple, not bitter at all eggplant that I really am glad I grew this year. And I have to show you, I am actually attempting to overwinter my eggplant plant. So my single seed challenge is actually going to continue into next spring when we see if this thing survives. So eggplants along with peppers, and I think there's a couple other types of vegetables that you grow in your garden, are perennial, which means that in the right conditions, if they're in a warm enough climate, they kind of go into a resting phase or non-productive stage over winter, and then in the summer or late spring when it's warm enough, they start producing again. They can live multiple years, whereas a lot of crops like tomatoes or annuals, you have to replant them every year. They're not going to last from year to year necessarily. My Japanese Nagasaki eggplant has done really well. So what I did was I repotted it. I shook off a lot of the potting mix at the bottom, but I tried not to mess with the roots too much. And I repotted it in here, and I'm going to show you right now. It's over here by my plants in the window. And I also have some peppers that I'm going to be overwintering that I'll give you an update on them as well. Here is my window, and here is my Nagasaki Japanese eggplant. You can see how great it's doing. This plant got really tall, and it's lost after I brought it in. I didn't, unlike peppers where you remove all of the leaves, I had seen mixed reviews on what to do with eggplants, whether to remove all the leaves or leave it as it is. So I left it as it was after repotting it. You'll see a layer of sand here. I watched on a YouTube video where a thick layer of sand will help keep bugs out from germinating, especially the fungus gnats that can be really problematic for bringing plants indoors and plants in general. So a thick layer of sand. It also helps keep the moisture in. You don't have to water it as often. So far it seems to be working. And a lot of the leaves have fallen off, as I said, but we have some leaves coming in. This is a fresh new leaf. And these are new as well. You can see the older ones that have the pests have put holes in them, but the new ones don't have that. So obviously the pests have not come. Another thing I did was I sprayed neem oil concentration on this, on the leaves and on the roots and the root ball before I brought it in. And I think for this one I also put a paper bag on the bottom to help keep bugs from kind of coming in from the bottom, just to give this plant as much chance as possible. This is a pretty big pot. I'd say it's probably like 10 inches, 11 inch piece. So hopefully it will survive the winter. Now I normally keep these over there. You see my doggy sleeping over there with the Japanese eggplant, but since we had family over for Thanksgiving, I moved them on top of this table just for a couple days. This is the purple bell pepper plant, and I took all of the leaves off and trimmed it down to just a couple of stems. I can't remember which is which, but one of these is jalapeno and the other one is Jimmy Nardello peppers. I'm not doing a whole video on the process until I have at least 2 years under my belt of trying it. For one of these, and I think it was this one, I took out all of the soil from the base and I put in all new potting mix. And I think that's probably why it hasn't produced new flowers. That might have been too much of a shock for it before I brought it in. But as long as your peppers still have green on them over the winter in the stem, you can see how there's still some green there, then they will probably be okay. If they turn completely brown and woody and die, then that means that, last year I had 1 out of 3 of the peppers I brought in survive. And for watering them, I basically just put my finger down in, and if it feels super dry, which it doesn't yet, it's been about 3 weeks, I'll water them, but you don't want to fertilize them. You just want to make sure they have enough water to get by. Maybe every 2 to 3 weeks you water them, and that's it. My last experiment in the garden involved trying to keep pests off of my plants, both the squash bugs and the cabbage butterflies, and the cucumber beetles, trying to use Bridal Tulle to protect my plants. I may have gone overboard. I covered anything I wanted to protect from bugs with it. I covered my zucchini and squash. I didn't cover one of my melons, or winter squash, but I covered my zucchini, my squash, my kale. I covered a cucumber plant. And overall, I'd say that one, I didn't factor in the backyard that the groundhogs would tear through the Bridal Tulle. It protected the kale in the backyard from the butterflies that lay the cabbage worms that will eat up all of your leaves, that will just decimate your kale plants. But it didn't protect it from the groundhogs, which I didn't expect it to, but I didn't expect the groundhogs to go for those plants, which was a little bit naive of me. But I'm still learning, right? The other component to the Bridal Tulle is that it can help seedlings be protected from pests and birds and other things early on, but when they start to get to a real size where they need to start producing fruit, where they're having flowers, all that stuff, other than kale, but I'm talking about like my cucumbers and my squash, they really don't do well covered in tulle. And the problem is my area has such big pest pressure. That means the second I uncovered those plants from the tulle, they were covered in squash bugs and cucumber beetles. And I got one squash from that plant, which was a combination of both having it in too small of a space with the Bridal Tulle and also the pest pressure on it. And I got, I think, like a handful of cucumbers from my cucumber plant. So I think my plan for Bridal Tulle next year is I am going to cover the kale, but this year I'm going to grow it in pots in the front yard, hopefully in a place the groundhogs will not have easy access to. They can get to it. I know they can come under the fence from the backyard very easily, and I've seen them walking down the main road by our garden before. I've seen them just traipsing down. But they are less predisposed to get to that kale. So I'm hoping I can protect it both from the groundhogs and from the cabbage butterflies. But I'm not going to be trying to use Bridal Tulle in the backyard to protect anything. The other thing is I'm not going to grow squash or cucumbers next year. I still had problems with the squash bugs attacking my eggplants. They ended up being somewhat scarred. I could cut it off, it's fine, but they weren't very pretty. I definitely wouldn't have been able to sell them if I was trying to sell them. And so there's just enough pest pressure already, and my garden is so small that why would I try to grow things that I know are doomed to fail? And I'm just not willing to use pesticides, and I really don't have the energy or effort at this point to use things like to regularly dust with diatomaceous earth. I get too nervous about bugs that I do want to be in the garden being affected by the diatomaceous earth, or neem oil as well. I really don't want to kill bugs if I can help it, because most of them have some value in the garden. And so I think I'm just going to focus on growing the things I know I can grow really well next year. I would love to grow them, but in this neighborhood, the pests are just too bad for me to be able to really have a productive garden for that. So that wraps up my experiments for the year. I have quite a few experiments I'm planning next year that I'm looking forward to, and in my next couple of videos I'm going to be sharing with you. I had the Audubon Society give two people from the Audubon Society take a tour of my property of the gardens and give me advice on how to have a property that can help support ecosystems and birds and wildlife, and help grow out the native plant population that I've been thinking about doing. So looking forward to sharing those videos with you, so keep an eye out for those. And then we're about to get into winter sowing season, and this is one of my favorite parts of the growing season, believe it or not, is winter sowing. So I hope you're sticking around. Make sure that you have the alerts set. If you aren't already a subscriber, please do, and make sure the alerts are set so you get the little bell is set so you get alerts when I post new content. And otherwise, I'll see you next time.